My father looked me dead in the eyes across a table full of food he did not cook, surrounded by family he had poisoned against me for 23 years, and he laughed. Not a chuckle, a laugh. The kind that fills a room and pulls everyone else into it like a current. And then he slid a small white box down the length of the Thanksgiving table. It bumped past the sweet potato casserole. It knocked into the bread basket. It stopped right in front of my plate. A DNA test kit. The room exploded. 22 relatives laughing. My brother raised his glass. My mother looked at the chandelier like she was praying it would fall on her. I looked at the box. Then I looked at my father. Then I smiled. Not because it was funny. Not because I was nervous. I smiled because I had spent 23 years being told I did not belong in that family. And in that single moment, I realized my father had just handed me the one instrument that would dismantle everything he had built, every lie he had told, every person he had manipulated, in one clean, devastating blow. I picked up the box. I said, "Thank you, Dad. I'll take this." He thought it was the punchline. It was the beginning of the end. My name is Savannah Calloway. I am 27 years old. I am a pediatric nurse in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this is the story of how my father's cruelest joke became the truth that destroyed him. Before I tell you what that DNA test revealed, you need to understand the world it was dropped into. Because the result was not just a number on a page, it was a grenade thrown into a house of cards that had been standing for over 2 decades. The Calloway family Thanksgiving was never just dinner. It was a performance. A carefully staged production where every seat at the table told you exactly where you stood in Douglas Calloway's universe. My father, Douglas Calloway, was a self-made man. He built a mid-size construction and renovation company in Charlotte from the ground up, starting with 2 trucks, a trailer, and a personality that could close a deal in 4 minutes flat. By the time I was born, he had 40 employees, 3 contracts with the county, and a reputation for being the kind of man who got things done and made sure everyone knew it. He was the kind of man who kept score. Always. Of money, of loyalty, of who sat where, and of who deserved what. And in Douglas Calloway's scorebook, I had never once been in the black. His name for the house was the property. Not the house. Not home. The property. A 6,000 square foot brick colonial in the Ballantine neighborhood of Charlotte with a circular driveway, a wine cellar, and a formal dining room that seated 30. He had the dining table custom built. He had his initials engraved into the leg. He sat at the head every single year like he was presiding over a board meeting. To his right sat my brother, Ethan. Ethan was 3 years older than me, broad-shouldered, sandy-haired, easy-smiling. The kind of man who walked into a room and made other men want to be his friend before he had said a single word. My father worshipped Ethan, not the way most fathers love their sons, quietly and solidly. My father worshipped Ethan the way a man worships a trophy he put on the highest shelf and made sure every guest noticed. At 22, Ethan had gone to work for my father's company straight out of a community college program he never finished. My father gave him a truck, a company card, and the title of operations manager. By 25, Ethan had a custom home on the other side of the neighborhood, a wife named Kendall, and a spot at every meeting, every deal, every contractor dinner that my father hosted. My father called him his legacy. Ethan called my father his best friend. I sat at the opposite end of the table, near the kitchen, near the swinging door that servants would have used if we had any. My spot was never assigned, but it was always the same, because I was the one who refilled the water pitchers, carried out the extra rolls, and cleared the plates between courses. Not because anyone asked me to. Because if I did not do it, no one else would, and my father would spend the rest of the evening making remarks. Here is what you would notice if you walked into that dining room for the first time. Every single Callaway had variations of the same look. My father, tall and fair with a square jaw and light eyes. My mother, Patricia, slender and blonde, with the kind of quiet beauty that had clearly cost her something. Ethan, a perfect blend of both of them. Cousins, aunts, uncles, all pulling from the same genetic palette. And then me, dark auburn hair, brown eyes, olive undertones in my skin that caught the sun differently. I had my mother's nose, but nothing else that matched the room. In every family photo since I was 3 years old, I looked like I had wandered in from another album. My father had never let me forget it. The remarks started early. They were never explosive. They were surgical. Small enough to seem like jokes. Consistent enough to be a campaign. Savannah must have gotten the mailman's coloring. Laughter. She takes after the mystery branch of the family. More laughter. I don't know where she came from, but it wasn't me. The loudest laughter of all, and every single year I sat near that kitchen door and said nothing. Until the year he put a DNA test in front of me and dared me to find out. That night, I finally said yes. People always ask how someone lets years of mistreatment go on without fighting back. The answer is simple and devastating. When it starts before you are old enough to have a vocabulary for what is being done to you, it does not feel like mistreatment. It feels like the rules. I want to give you 23 years in the space it takes to breathe. When I was 5 years old, I drew a picture of our family for a kindergarten art project. Stick figures on a green hill. Dad, Mom, Ethan, and me. My teacher hung it on the board. When my father picked me up that afternoon and saw it, he pulled it off the board in front of the whole class, folded it in half, and put it in his coat pocket. On the drive home, he said, "You've got too much imagination, Savannah." I did not understand what that meant. I was 5. I understood it at 30, driving home from that Thanksgiving dinner with a DNA kit on my passenger seat. When I was 9, I won the regional spelling competition at my elementary school. I came home with a small gold trophy and a certificate with my name printed on it in bold letters. My mother put both on the kitchen counter. That evening, my father walked in, looked at the trophy, looked at me, and said, "Ethan won 3 of those by now." Then he set his keys on top of the certificate and went to watch the game. Ethan had won none. I learned that from my aunt years later, but by the time she told me, the damage was already structural. When I was 12, I asked my father to come to my school's open night. My science project had placed first in the district. My teacher, Mrs. Hartley, had personally called the house to ask that both parents attend. My father came in the door at 8 that evening smelling like a contractor dinner, looked at my project display board for approximately 4 seconds, nodded, and walked over to compliment another student's volcano. I stood next to my first place ribbon for another 40 minutes, and then took it down myself and put it in my backpack. When I was 16, my mother got sick. Nothing catastrophic, but a surgery that required 6 weeks of recovery. During those 6 weeks, I cooked, cleaned, grocery shopped, drove Ethan to his practices, managed the household, and kept everything running while my father worked his contracts. On the night my mother was cleared by her doctor, my father took us all out to dinner. He made a toast. He thanked Ethan for being the man of the house while he was busy. He thanked my mother for being strong. He did not mention me. I sat across the table holding a glass of water and reminded myself to breathe. When I was 18, I graduated valedictorian. I had practiced my speech for 6 weeks. I stood at that podium and delivered every word cleanly and without trembling. In the audience, I could see my mother in the 3rd row, Ethan beside her, scrolling his phone. The seat next to my mother, the one I had told my father specifically to arrive early for, was empty. He was at a golf tournament 2 hours away. He sent me a text that night. It said, "Heard you did good." That was the whole message. When I was 20, I got into the nursing program at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Full merit scholarship for the first 2 years. I came home for Christmas and told my father at the dinner table. He looked at Ethan and said, "Ethan's thinking about getting his contractor's license." And the conversation moved on like I had not spoken at all. I learned early that in the Calloway house, I was furniture, present enough to be useful, invisible enough to be forgotten. And the only time my existence was acknowledged was when my father needed an audience for a joke at my expense. I had absorbed all of it, quietly, completely, without a single public breakdown. But the morning after that Thanksgiving dinner, sitting at my kitchen table in Charlotte with that white DNA kit box in front of me, something shifted in my chest. I was done absorbing. It was time to find out exactly what he had been afraid of all along. There is something deeply unsettling about opening a DNA test kit alone at your kitchen table at 6 a.m. Not because of the test itself, because of what it means that you are doing it at all. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before I took a single sip. The box was open. 3 swabs, 2 vials, a set of instructions printed in 12 languages, and a prepaid return envelope addressed to a laboratory in Austin, Texas. The kind of test that costs $49 online and changes families forever. I had looked up the brand the night before. 72-hour standard processing, 99.9% accuracy for direct paternity. Used in family court proceedings in 11 states. $49? 23 years? The math was almost funny. The instructions said to swab the inside of your cheek for 30 seconds. I did it twice to be sure. I sealed the vial, labeled it with the ID number on the form, and packed everything back into the envelope. Clean, simple, mechanical. But here is where it got complicated. A standard paternity test requires a sample from the potential father. I only had mine, which meant I was not taking a paternity test in the traditional sense. I was submitting for a DNA ancestry and family matching analysis, the kind that tells you which relatives you share genetic markers with, which ethnicities make up your biology, and whether or not you appear in any other registered family trees in their database. My father, as it turned out, had taken one of these same tests 3 years earlier. Ethan had told me at Christmas, completely casually, the way people mention things they do not realize are significant. He had said, "Dad did one of those 23andMe things to figure out if we were actually Scottish." He had laughed about it. I had filed it away in the back of my mind without knowing why. 3 years later, I understood why. If my father's DNA profile was already in a database, and if I submitted mine to the same platform or a platform that shared data with it, the system would automatically flag us as a potential match and calculate the probability of a family relationship. Father, daughter, or not. I did not send my test to the company my father had used. I sent it to 2. The first was the standard kit from Thanksgiving. The second was a separate test I ordered online that morning, a premium analysis from a different company, the kind that cross-references across multiple databases and generates a detailed relationship probability report. That one cost $112. I paid for it without blinking. I had spent more than that on textbooks in nursing school that I never opened twice. I dropped both envelopes in the blue postal box at the end of my street at 7:45 in the morning. Then I went home, showered, and went to work a 12-hour shift in the pediatric ward, where I held the hands of children who were genuinely sick and reminded myself what real suffering looked like. My colleagues noticed something was different about me that week. My charge nurse, Deb, a woman with 30 years in pediatrics, and the emotional radar of a person who has seen every kind of human crisis, stopped me in the hallway on my 3rd shift back. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "You okay, Sav?" I told her I was processing something. She nodded slowly. "The kind of something that changes things?" "I think so," I said. She put her hand on my shoulder once, squeezed, and walked away. That was the thing about Deb. She knew when to ask and when to just let you carry it. I carried it for 19 days. 19 days of checking my email every morning before I got out of bed. 19 days of working my shifts and going home to an apartment that felt like a waiting room. 19 days of thinking about my father's face when he slid that box down the table and everyone laughed. 19 days of knowing, somewhere deep in the part of me that had always known, what those results were going to say. But what I did not know, what I could not have predicted in any version of that scenario, was what the results were going to say about my brother. That part I did not see coming. Waiting for something that could rewrite your entire history is a specific kind of torture. You go through the motions of your regular life while an entirely different version of it sits in a laboratory in Texas, being measured. I want to tell you about those 19 days, because they matter. They matter because of what I found out during them, before the results even arrived. And they matter because they changed the way I understood my own story. On day 3, I called my Aunt Marlene, my mother's older sister, the one who had always been quietly kind to me at family events, in a way that felt almost apologetic. Marlene lived in Asheville, ran a small ceramics studio, and was the only person in the extended family who had ever come to a single one of my school events without being directly invited. I called her on a Tuesday evening and I did not ease into it. I said, "Marlene, did you know? Did you know why Dad treated me differently?" There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough to be its own answer. Then she said, very carefully, "Savannah, what's happened?" I told her about Thanksgiving. I told her about the DNA kit and the laughter and the fact that I had submitted it and 2 others for processing. I told her I was waiting for results and that I needed to know if there was something my mother had told her, something anyone had said, anything that would help me understand the shape of the thing I was walking into. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Marlene said, "Your mother called me in October, 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. She was frightened, Savannah. She said your father had been asking questions again. Old questions. The kind he had started asking when you were born." "What kind of questions?" "About the year before you were born," Marlene said. "Your mother had a hard time that year. She and your father went through a rough patch. A bad one. She was lonely, and she made a decision that she regretted before it was over." I sat down on my kitchen floor. I was not sure when I had stopped standing. "She had an affair," I said. It was not a question. "A brief one," Marlene said, "with someone who is no longer in the picture, someone who moved away years ago. She ended it before she knew she was pregnant. She told me she always believed you were Douglas's. She said the timing made more sense on your father's side, but she was never completely certain. And she never told him. She told herself there was nothing to tell," Marlene said. "She convinced herself. And then you were born and you looked like you and she stayed convinced." "But he never believed her?" "No," Marlene said quietly. "He never did." I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time after we hung up. Not crying, not angry yet. Just reorganizing. Sorting through 23 years of memories with this new information as a key. Watching all the locked doors swing open at once. The torn Father's Day card. The empty seat at my graduation. The tuition cut. Every remark about the mailman. Every joke about where I had come from. Every moment my father had made me feel like a question mark in his house, rather than a daughter. He had spent 23 years punishing a theory, not a fact. A theory. One he had never tested. One he had never confronted directly. One he had turned into a weapon and used on a child who had done nothing wrong and could not defend herself. And now, finally, he had given me the tool to test it. On day 7, I received a notification from the second testing company. My results were processing faster than expected. Premium processing, they called it. On day 11, I received the notification that my results were ready. I did not open them immediately. I sat with my phone face down on the counter for 4 full hours. I finished my dinner. I washed the dishes. I folded the laundry on my couch. I called my best friend Priya and talked about nothing important for 45 minutes without mentioning any of it. Then I picked up my phone. I opened the app. And I read the most important document of my life. There are moments in your life where time actually slows down. Not metaphorically, literally. Where your brain, overwhelmed by the weight of what it is processing, begins rationing each second like it knows it will never get them back. Reading those results was one of those moments. The screen loaded in 2 seconds. I know because I was counting. The report was laid out in clean clinical sections. Ethnicity breakdown at the top. A colorful pie chart I did not look at. Family matches below that. Organized by relationship probability and shared centimorgans. That is the unit of genetic measurement used to calculate how closely two people are related. The higher the number, the closer the relationship. I scrolled past the ethnicity data. I found the family matches section. There were 4 names flagged as close family matches. 2 were cousins I recognized from the maternal side of my family, relatives I had grown up seeing at Christmas. The third was a name I did not recognize, a distant second cousin on a branch I had never mapped. The 4th name made me stop breathing. Douglas R. Calloway. Relationship probability, father/daughter. Confidence level, 99.97%. Shared centimorgans, 1,782. I read it 4 times. Not because I did not understand it, because I needed my nervous system to catch up with my eyes. Douglas Calloway was my father. Biologically, genetically. Without question, without ambiguity, without the shadow of doubt he had been living inside for 23 years. He was my father. He had always been my father. Every cruel remark, every empty chair at every event, every time he tore something down that I had built, every time he let the room laugh at me, every single act of rejection over 23 years. All of it had been based on a suspicion that his own DNA had just proved completely, categorically, irrevocably wrong. I put my phone down on the counter. I pressed both hands flat against the cold surface. I breathed. Then I picked up my phone and I scrolled. Because here is the thing about these family database platforms. They do not just show you your matches. They show you the matches of your matches, if those individuals have also taken tests and registered their profiles. And my father, in his 3-year-old test taken to verify whether we were Scottish, had registered his profile publicly. His matches were visible to me. I looked at his family match list. I found what I expected to find: my mother's markers, filtered through family connections, cousins and aunts on his side that I recognized, second-degree relatives dating back 3 generations, and then, sitting at the top of his list, flagged in the highest relationship probability category, was a name that was not mine: Ethan Douglas Calloway. Relationship probability, not a biological match. Confidence level, 99.94%. I read it again, and a 4th time. The platform's analysis was unambiguous, based on the genetic data registered under my father's profile and the data I had just submitted under my own. The system had run a comparative sibling analysis. Ethan and I shared the expected half-sibling markers consistent with sharing one biological parent, our mother. We did not share the paternal markers that would indicate a shared father. Ethan was not Douglas Calloway's biological son. I was. Ethan, the golden boy, the one with the custom-built house and the company card and the operations manager title, the one who had sat at my father's right hand for 30 years, the one my father had engraved initials into furniture for, the one he had called his legacy, his pride, his proof that the Calloway name would carry forward. Ethan was not a Calloway by blood. I was the only one who was. I sat at that kitchen counter for a very long time. The apartment was silent. Outside, Charlotte was doing its ordinary Thursday evening things, traffic and restaurant noise and a dog barking 2 floors below. The world sounded completely normal. Nothing about my world was normal anymore. I opened a new document on my laptop. I began to type the most important email of my life, and I thought very carefully about exactly who needed to be on the recipient list. Revenge, when it is real and when it is warranted, does not feel hot. It does not feel like rage. It feels cold and precise and quietly inevitable, like watching a row of dominoes you set up weeks ago finally begin to fall. I did not send the email that night. I am going to be honest with you about that because I think it matters. Because every instinct I had was screaming at me to forward those results to every email address I had, post them publicly, and watch the fallout happen in real time. The anger was there. It was enormous. It had been building for 23 years, and now it had a target and a detonator, and my hand was already on the switch. But I waited. Because waiting was the part of this that would make the difference between a moment of satisfaction and something permanent. I called Priya the next morning. Priya had been my best friend since the 2nd year of nursing school. She was sharp, pragmatic, and the kind of person who asked the right question rather than the comfortable one. I told her everything over the phone in one continuous breath. The test, the results, Ethan's numbers, all of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want the outcome to be?" "I want my father to know," I said. "That is not an outcome," she said. "That is a notification. What do you want to happen after he knows?" I thought about that for a long time. I did not want a confrontation at someone's front door. I did not want a screaming match, or a public meltdown, or a moment of shock that everyone recovered from in 6 weeks and quietly moved past. I had watched my family move past things for 23 years. They were remarkably good at it. My father in particular had an extraordinary ability to absorb inconvenient truths and reclassify them as irrelevant. I needed this to be something he could not reclassify. I needed witnesses. Over the following 3 days, I made a list. Every person who had been at that Thanksgiving table, every person who had laughed, every cousin, aunt, uncle, family friend, and business associate who had sat in that dining room and watched my father slide that DNA kit across the table like it was the funniest thing he had ever done. 22 people. I had all of their email addresses. I had collected them over the years the way you collect things you think you might need someday, without knowing why. Priya helped me write the email. Not the angry version. Not the version that screamed or accused or used exclamation marks. The clean version. The factual version. The version that laid out the results of both tests, attached the official reports from both laboratories, and stated the findings in the same calm language that the scientists had used. The subject line was, "The results you asked for." I did not add anything dramatic. I did not add anything cruel. I wrote 6 sentences. They said, "You may remember that at Thanksgiving this year, a DNA test kit was presented to me as a joke. I took it. I also purchased a second test from an independent laboratory for verification purposes. Both results have been processed and confirmed. I have attached the full reports from both companies below. I thought everyone at that table deserved to see what they were so eager to laugh about." That was it. 6 sentences, no accusations, no names called, no score settled with words. The documents did all of that on their own. I sat on the email for 4 more days. I printed both reports and kept them in a folder. I went to work. I ran my shifts. I came home and I sat with my decision, and I made absolutely certain I was not acting from a place of temporary rage. I asked myself every morning whether I would regret sending it. The answer every morning was the same. No. The only thing I would have regretted was staying silent one more time. On a Monday evening at 8:47 p.m., I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and clicked send. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, turned on a movie I had been meaning to watch for 2 months, and went to bed at a normal hour. The dominoes had started falling. I was not going to watch them. I was going to sleep. I want to be clear that I did not expect what happened. Woke up at 6:15 to my alarm. Woke up at 6:15 to my alarm the same way I always did. I made coffee. I fed the cat. I sat on my couch with my mug and picked up my phone. 47 missed calls, 11 voicemails, 32 text messages, 4 missed FaceTime requests. I set the phone face up on my coffee table and watched it vibrate continuously for approximately 30 seconds while I drank my coffee. The first text I opened was from my mother. It said, "Savannah, please call me right now." Sent at 2:13 in the morning. The second was from my cousin Brenda, who had always been my father's most devoted audience at these Thanksgiving events. It said, "I had no idea. I am so sorry. I should have spoken up years ago." Sent at 11:40 p.m. The third was from my Uncle Pete, my father's brother. It was 3 lines long. It said, "Douglas called me last night. I want you to know I told him exactly what I thought of him. You deserved better than this family gave you. I mean that." I did not open the rest. Not yet. I got dressed for work, drove to the hospital, and completed my shift. I answered 0 calls during those 12 hours. I told Deb when I arrived that I had sent an email the night before and that things were in motion. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "Good for you, kid." Then she assigned me my patients and we both got to work. When I got home that evening and finally sat down with my phone, I went through everything methodically. I made a list on a notepad of who had called, what the tone of their message was, and whether a response was warranted. My mother had called 11 times and left 4 voicemails. The first was panicked. The second was tearful. The third was an apology that lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds. The fourth was quiet and exhausted, and the most honest thing she had ever said to me. In the fourth one, she said, "I spent 30 years telling myself I was protecting everyone by not knowing. I see now that I was just protecting myself. You deserved the truth, and I failed you. I am so sorry, Savannah." I listened to it twice. Then I set it aside. My father called once. No voicemail. 12 minutes after I had sent the email. So midnight on Monday. He must have been awake when it arrived. Or someone else called him and woke him up. Either way, he called once, at midnight, and never called again. My brother Ethan called 8 times. The first 5 were in the middle of the night, between midnight and 3 a.m. Then 1 at 7 in the morning, 1 at noon, 1 at 4 p.m. No voicemails for the first 7 calls. Then the 8th call had a voicemail attached. I played it sitting at my kitchen table with my notepad in front of me. Ethan's voice on that voicemail was something I had never heard before. Not angry, not defensive, cracked wide open. He sounded like a man who had just had the floor removed from under him and was still trying to figure out which way was down. He said, "Savannah, I don't know what to say to you. I've been walking around this house all day trying to find a version of this that makes sense, and I can't. I know we were never close, and I know a lot of that is my fault. But I grew up thinking I had a place in this family, and now I don't even know who I am. I'm not asking for anything. I needed to hear your voice. Even if you don't call back. I'm sorry for every time I let him treat you badly. I'm sorry." I put the phone down, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, I cried. Not for myself, for Ethan. Because whatever he had done or not done, he had also been a casualty of the same lie, just from the other side of it. There comes a moment in every long and overdue reckoning where you have to decide whether you are going to stay at a distance and watch the fallout, or whether you are going to stand in the same room as the person who hurt you and let them see your face when they realize they lost. I decided to stand in the room. Not immediately. I gave it 9 days. 9 days of calls and messages and the controlled chaos of a family that was tearing itself apart at the seams and frantically trying to decide which version of reality to believe. During those 9 days, I responded only to people I trusted. Brenda, Uncle Pete, 2 cousins who had been kind to me since childhood. My mother, once, in a carefully worded text that said I had received her voicemail and that I would be in touch when I was ready. I did not respond to my father. On the 9th day, my mother texted and asked if I would come to the house. Not for a family event, not for a confrontation. She said my father wanted to speak to me in person and that she would be present, and that she was asking me, not on his behalf, but on her own. I drove to Ballantyne on a Saturday afternoon in early December. The circular driveway had my father's truck and my mother's SUV, and nothing else. The house looked the same from the outside. The wreath on the door was the same one my mother had bought 5 years ago and kept replacing the ribbon on every year. The property, unchanged and enormous and completely, irreversibly different. My mother answered the door. She looked like she had not slept properly in 9 days, which was accurate. She pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than any hug she had given me in the last decade. I let her hold on. When she stepped back, her eyes were wet. I held mine steady. My father was in the living room. Douglas Calloway, who had never once looked small to me in my entire life, looked small. He was sitting on the edge of the couch rather than in his chair, which I noticed immediately because the chair was where Douglas Calloway always sat. The chair was his territory. The fact that he was on the couch felt like the first honest thing I had seen from him in years. He looked up when I came in. He did not stand up. I sat in the chair across from him. I did not say anything. I had decided on the drive over that I was not going to be the one to start speaking. He looked at his hands. He looked at the window. He looked at me. And then, Douglas Calloway said, "I don't know how to apologize for 23 years. I said, "That is a fair assessment." He looked at me. I looked back. No anger in my expression, no forgiveness either, just clear and steady. The look of someone who has already done their crying and is now simply present. "I convinced myself," he said slowly. "I had convinced myself so completely, and I took it out on you. Every single year." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "You were my daughter. You were always my daughter. And I treated you like a problem." "You did," I said. "I'm sorry," he said. I let that sit in the room for a moment. Then I said, "I know you are. And I want you to understand something clearly. Your apology matters to me. Not because it changes what happened, but because it means you are finally standing in the truth. I have been standing in it my whole life. Now you are too." He did not say anything. "I don't know what my forgiveness looks like yet," I told him. "That is honest. I am not going to tell you something that is not true just to make this easier. But I'm here. I came. That is what I have right now." My mother was crying quietly from the doorway. My father nodded once, slowly, like a man accepting a sentence he had already agreed was fair. We sat in that living room for 2 more hours. It was not warm, and it was not resolved. But it was real. For the first time in 23 years, it was real. Here is something nobody tells you about the moment the truth finally wins. It does not feel like a victory. It feels like setting down a weight you had been carrying for so long that you had stopped noticing how heavy it was. And then, your whole body recalibrates to what it feels like to stand straight. Let me tell you what happened in the months after I sent that email. My father restructured his will. I found out from my mother, who told me with an expression that was somewhere between relief and exhaustion, that within 3 weeks of the DNA results being confirmed, my father had called his attorney and had 2 documents updated. The first was his estate plan. For the first time in my life, I was included as an equal beneficiary. Not out of guilt, he told my mother, out of accuracy, out of what was right. The second document was the company ownership structure. Callaway Construction and Renovation had been informally set up to transfer to Ethan on my father's retirement, a decision made years ago without any formal conversation with me. That transfer plan was amended. I was added to the succession documentation. I did not ask for it. I did not pursue it. My father did it because he understood that the way he had structured his legacy had been built on a fiction, and that fiction had cost me things that a line in a document could not fully repay, but that a line in a document could at least acknowledge. Ethan and I spoke, really spoke, for the first time in our lives. We met for dinner in February at a quiet Italian restaurant in Noda, and we sat across from each other for 3 hours. He told me about the days after the email. He said he had driven around Charlotte for 4 hours the morning after he found out. Just driving. Trying to locate himself in a family map that had been completely redrawn overnight. He told me he had always known something was off. Not about his paternity. He had never suspected that. But about the way our father treated the 2 of us so differently. He said he had benefited from it, and had never questioned it loudly enough, and that he was ashamed of that. I told him I was not looking for his shame. I was looking for his honesty. He gave it to me, and that was enough to start. We are not close yet. We are building something slowly, carefully, across a foundation that is new and has to be tested before it can be trusted. But we are building. That surprised me more than almost anything. My mother and I are in therapy, together, once a month. Her individual work is her own business, and I do not speak to it. But the joint sessions have been the most important conversations of my adult life. She is doing the hard work of not defending herself, and I am doing the hard work of not needing her to be perfect in order to love her. It is slow. It is real. And my father. My father is a complicated man doing an imperfect accounting of a long and damaging error. He calls me on Sundays. Sometimes we talk for 10 minutes. Sometimes for an hour. He asks about my patients in a way that feels genuinely interested. He does not ask for forgiveness outright. He earns small pieces of trust by showing up consistently and saying less than he used to. Last month, he came to the hospital for the pediatric unit's annual fundraiser. I had mentioned it once, offhandedly, 2 Sundays before. He showed up. He stood in the back of the room in his good coat, and he watched me give a short speech about a program we had funded. When I finished, he clapped. Not for show. The quiet kind of clap that means something. I caught his eye from the podium. He nodded once. I nodded back. That was not a movie moment. It was not a tearful reconciliation with swelling music. It was a small, honest thing shared between 2 people who are learning, very late, how to be in the same family. The DNA test did not give me a father, but it gave me the truth. And the truth, it turned out, was the only thing that was ever going to set either of us free. My name is Savannah Callaway. I am 27 years old. I work the night shift in a pediatric ward, and I drive home in the early morning hours through a city that is quiet and still and full of people who are also, in their own ways, carrying things they have not yet set down. I want to say one thing before you go. You do not have to set those things down all at once. You do not have to confront anything before you are ready. You do not have to forgive on anyone else's timeline or stay silent because it is easier for the people around you. The truth has its own schedule, and when you are finally ready to pick it up and carry it forward, It will be there, exactly where you left it, waiting. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply say, okay, and then go quietly, get the proof. If this story reached you today, if it touched something real in you, I hope you will subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Your words matter more than you know. The next story is already waiting.